Voice of Virginia. By the sounds of Buck Owens, it's time to talk with our very good friend, our former governor, former Senator George Allen joins us every Friday here on News Radio WRVA. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Rich. Welcome back. Gary did a great job in your batter's box spot, but we're glad to have you back.
Thank you,
It was actually good to see you in the midst of it at the Reagan movie showing in Richmond last Tuesday, I guess it was.
Yeah, last
in the midst
Tuesday.
of the thunderstorm.
Yeah, last Tuesday, my son Rigney and I went and we sat with the governor and our next governor. If I get my way and get to vote for Jason Miyares, and it was great to see him. And then the extended cut of the Reagan movie was fantastic. I guess it's going to get re-released into the theaters coming up in September.
Yeah, sure hope so. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from what Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s. Obviously, his whole life is inspirational and instructive, but a lot of the dealings with Russia these days, as opposed to the Soviet Union, but there's certainly a lot of similarities and lessons that can be drawn.
I want to talk about people that inspire this next generation. I'll do that in just a second because it's something Young Americans Foundation and as a YAF alumni, I do want to bring this up. But I before we get to that, though, I do want to pay our respects for Senator Lindsey Graham. I know you were up in D.C. At the services, wanted to get your takeaway.
Well, Susan and I drove up to it, and the services were long. They were great. President Trump spoke and so forth. The thing that impressed me the most is how many that the National Cathedral was filled, and it was bipartisan. We all got on buses by the Capitol and went to the National Cathedral, and there were Republicans, Democrats. You had President Zelensky was there, Prime Minister Netanyahu was in attendance, and there was an appreciation for Lindsey, one, because of who he was as a personality, just a cheerful character, just somebody you'd consider rich. Gosh, he's a good guy, just very affable, happy-go-lucky. But he also had a purpose to everything he wanted to do. He was not one to just wait around and wait and watch things happen. He wanted to make things happen, and he'd work in such a way that you could, and this is how you got to get things done. You have to have this kind of attitude: is find somebody who's a Democrat in the other party who will agree with you on this 1 out of 100 issues, and get this done. And I ended up talking. The way they put us on buses was by alphabet, so our bus was A's and B's. We're bus number 1.
Okay.
And Blumenthal was on the bus, and so I said, "That's great. Now here's a tribute to Lindsey." Because he was a co-sponsor of the Russia Sanctions Act with Lindsey. And so we were talking about what the impediments were in tariffs. I said, yeah, I know I don't like tariffs. I filed an amicus brief against the IEEPA tariffs with President Trump. And so we were discussing, some of the things that were some of the senators who might have some problems with that bill, which they actually that night, at least procedurally, moved forward. And so Lindsey was that kind of a character who could find ways to get things done. And this Russia Sanctions Act, which I think they've added Iran to it, which is fine, sanctioning countries who are buying oil from Iran or from Russia, which is the way that those countries stay funded for their war machines or terrorist attacks. So the point is Lindsey was an example of somebody who had a great attitude, cheerful attitude, but got things done in a bipartisan way, and we need more of that.
Governor George Allen joining us here on News Radio WRVA. Sir, I saw Senator Blumenthal right afterwards. Maybe it was just the spirit of Lindsey getting a chance to talk to you. I saw him on television right afterwards, and that's as bipartisan and as friendly as I've ever seen him appearing on Fox News. So I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, no, that it really was that spirit with him. And it was actually a very good conversation with him. I was talking to Chris Coons of Delaware, and somebody said, did you blast him about such and such? I said, no, I was trying to be positive. I said, I really like driving through southern Delaware. South of Dover is really nice. and so forth. One other thing I got to tell you, and this is consistent with what was going on yesterday in Congress with the hearing on Fauci.
Yes.
Before getting on the buses, we're right by the Senate, the Russell office building, which was where my office was. Had to use the men's room. Well, to get to the men's room, you go by Rand Paul's office. So I pop in to the front office area. I said, Senator Paul in here? And they said, no, there's 4 or 5 young people that you usually have interns in your front office reception area. And I said, see that map there of Kentucky? That was once part of Virginia. And they're saying, yeah, okay, fine. I said, well, I'm George Allen. These kids are young. They probably weren't even, they were certainly not born when I was governor. And I said, well, I'm former senator, governor from Virginia. And let me just give this message to Senator Paul. And Susan's thinking they're going to call the Capitol Police with me in there barging in. And I said, look, Senator Paul wants to investigate and hold Dr. Fauci accountable. Please let him know that this former senator, former governor from Virginia, which is the mother state of Kentucky, is 110% in support and encouragement. They were all cheerful. I left, and they're all cheered up. And this Fauci hearings, obviously there should be accountability for him. But I really think it's important not just to look at Fauci, but look at the decisions that were made by presidents and by governors.
Yes.
Using emergency powers. Our system is based on checks and balances, and the things that were being done, shutting down schools, shutting down places of worship, shutting down businesses, requiring people to be caged and muzzled, but the government liquor stores are still open in Virginia. And how Virginia handled this and the harm that was done to children and enterprises and people cannot happen again. And it's something you could look at the states like Tennessee and Georgia and Florida and South Dakota, states that stayed open versus those that locked down and listened to whatever Fauci said. And I don't just blame Fauci, I blame these governors and any presidents who did not use proportionality in their assessment of these hypochondriac paranoid policies they had. And the states that stayed open and didn't force vaccines, and there was no difference in mortality rates than any of the ones that were locked down, although New Jersey and New York had higher mortality rates. But I think that's because they're so densely populated up there.
Absolutely. Okay, I need to save time because I have to ask you about something. Again, I mentioned this being a YAF alumni. I was the state vice president, Young Americans for Freedom, when I was in college.
That's great. That's great, Rich.
It's a great organization. It really helped me kind of form some of the things. But there were leaders of YAF, and it was, Bill Buckley was the original, and then all the rest that we saw come after that. We in Virginia are going to have a rock star show of conservatives for the Freedom 250 rally that all kicks off next week at Mount Vernon, the National Conservative Student Conference. Let me just kind of run through the names that we're going to be talking about that are coming right here. The rally kicks off on Thursday. Big fireworks display, speeches from Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of Great Britain. I'll just run through some of the other names. Ben Shapiro, Dr. Ben Carson, Harmeet Dillon, Scott Jennings, Molly Hemingway, Nick Freitas, Art Laffer, Jason Miyares, Andrew Clavin, Isabel Brown. I could keep going on and on and on. I mean, this is the murderer's row of conservatives, and they're all coming here to Virginia, kicking off in Mount Vernon, and then they'll be here through the weekend.
Yeah, but I'm honored to speak right after Jason, after our former Attorney General and future Governor, Jason Miyares, speaks. I get to go after Jason. And Jason and I have given speeches during this 250th, so we have a pretty good idea of what each of us are going to say. But there's over 1,000 registrants, young people.
Right.
And as Ronald Reagan said, that freedom's never more than one generation away from extinction. The great thing about you, Rich, and this is what we want for future generations, that's the Young America's Foundation, is to make sure that young people appreciate freedom and understand and carry on that torch for future generations to pass it on. And So Mount Vernon's a perfect place to be holding. Obviously George Washington was crucial in winning the war. The Declaration of Independence was a magnificent document in spirit, but we had to fight for it, and we had to fight for over 5 years to gain our independence from the British monarchy. And George Washington obviously led that, and it later became our first president. So it ought to be fantastic. Hopefully it doesn't rain. Be a great fireworks display, and then the students are from all over the country coming to Mount Vernon in Northern Virginia. So, Rich, your story, Katie Pavlich, who people see on TV, she came out of that Young America's Foundation education, so to speak. And by the way, with me being chair of the Reagan Ranch Board of Governors, we are preserving Ronald Reagan's home, boyhood home in Dixon, and obviously his ranch in Santa Barbara County, California. And that's part of the Young America's Foundation. And we used Reagan's ranch in California and his boyhood home in Dixon, Illinois, as we call it a Reagan schoolhouse, to educate and inform young people and future generations. So, Rich, you're one of those great alumni who's really made it big and having a great persuasive approach on people going forward.
Hey, Super Dave, I need to go long here, so don't get mad at me. But I got to share this with you, sir. So I was state vice chairman of the College Republicans. I was like, I think I was 20 years old. No, I had to be 20 years old because I hadn't turned 21 yet. But in D.C., they had grandfathered in the drinking age because they raised it from 18 to 21. So I got to have my first legal drink in D.C. But I remember when I joined Young Americans, I actually came to D.C. It's the first time I had ever really flown. I think it was the first time I ever flew anywhere. Came to D.C. I came to this event. I think, gosh, it must have been, I was 20 years old. I came to this event, and I remember, I think we had a couple members of Congress. I remember, I know who I met. I met Fawn Hall that day at this event.
During all that.
Yeah, I met Fawn Hall that day, and I went there, and I remember we were having a speaker. I can't remember who the speaker was, but a bunch of liberal Democrats crashed it, and they were standing there protesting at the back of the hall, and I stood up and started chanting USA, USA, drowned them out, and they ended up turning tail and running. But I remember that's the first time I remember standing up to the left that were trying that heckler's veto, and it stuck to me to this day. So I think I went to this event 40 years ago. And I remember going to DC for this. So now that we're talking about this, I think I might have attended one of the original events.
That's great. We don't have time to go through it all, but what you just recounted is exactly the spirit that the Young America's Foundation is continuing to inspire young people to do. It's not just back down, don't cower, don't be intimidated, fight back with evidence, with reason, with logic. And Brooke was, when she was it's too much time, but they shouted back singing Rocky Top over the protesters at the University of Tennessee after Trump's election in 2016. I was so proud of her and the Young Americans for Freedom chapter there. But that's what we try to do, is bolster or give evidence or information to young people and ways to interact with others, so that you can be on offense, not just on defense. And a lot of these liberals are so intolerant of anyone who doesn't agree completely with them. They're criticized and shouted down and try to intimidate them. And so, Rich, that's just a great story.
Yeah, that's
and we
incredible.
Could spend a whole segment next week.
Yes.
On it. If you want to come up to Mount Vernon with the Riggs, you can come to this rally if you want to.
Sure, I'll come up.
Just let me know, and I'll arrange it. So
Marcus, because Riggs is going home a week from Saturday. Marcus for 2 will be there because the apple doesn't fall far from that tree. That Young Americans for Freedom put that fire in my belly, and you've met him. So, all right, it's done. I'll give you a call.
Yeah. Well, text me back and forth, and I'll arrange to make sure that you can be there.
Oh, my God. Great. This is incredible.
Great.
Oh, awesome. Sir, thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Adios. Bye.
Oh, my gosh. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm so excited.